So it's emerged as the defining issue for the Liberal government, the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. That's been the other side of their national price on carbon. It's the so-called grand bargain of getting resource development and environmental protection. So they bought the pipeline for $4.5 billion with a big promise to get shovels in the ground for a $10 billion expansion. But that got stopped cold recently by the Federal Court of Appeal. Suddenly, everything is frozen. More consultation is needed, more environmental protection, which means more delays and more costs. The question is how much, and when will this expansion ever get built? Let's find out. Joining me now, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, Dominic LeBlanc. Great to have you on the program, Dominic LeBlanc.
Thanks for inviting me, Evan.
Look, the pipeline issue is now fundamental to what they call the grand bargain. Your government came in power saying we'll build the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. In return, we will have a national price on carbon. Both are now in jeopardy. Let's start with the facts. How much are these delays going to cost Canadians every month? What's the number?
But Evan, first of all, we've never said that having a national plan to deal with the real effects of climate change was contingent on a pipeline. We've said that you can grow the economy, take Canadian natural resources to markets other than the United States, and it's also important to have a robust plan to deal with climate change. So I just want to be clear that we think it's important to do both and to do both well. With respect to the pipeline, the federal court told us that we need to do more work with respect to Indigenous consultations and with respect to a plan around marine scoping to deal particularly with the endangered southern resident killer whales. So we're reviewing the decision and finding the best way forward, conscious of the need to be expeditious.
When Bill Morneau stood out there, I'm going to read what he said. This is a $4.5 billion pipeline. He wanted to, and I'll use his words, he wanted to guarantee the summer construction season. That's blown. Any CEO who owns something, and your governments are now is now the CEO of this pipeline, would know what every month of delay, for whatever reason, will cost your shareholders. In this case, it's the taxpayer. I just want a number. You got the delay. What is it going to cost us for every month this thing is delayed so you can consult and redo all that stuff that, frankly, all Canadians thought you'd already had done? What will it cost?
Well, Evan, look, the construction season, we were hoping, as you said, that the construction could proceed this year. Obviously, in light of the Federal Court of Appeal decision, that's not going to be possible in the coming months. What we have said, however, is that we recognize the urgency of doing this properly, and that's the analysis that we're doing right now. We're developing options in terms of the best way forward. I'll tell you, the cost will be higher if we don't find the best way forward to build this pipeline. The cost of not having access to different markets other than the United States for Canadian natural resources is huge.
Can you give us a date as to when you think the appeals process or whatever process, consultation process you're going to use, what is a new date that Canadians can look for when we think this pipeline may get built again?
So I want to be careful. We haven't made a decision with respect to an appeal. That is a decision that the government will take over the coming weeks. What we are doing in an expeditious way, and a group of ministers are working on this literally on a daily basis, is to identify the most appropriate way to move forward to ensure that the pipeline gets built. That is the responsibility that we have as a government. The Federal Court of Appeal gave us a very significant decision, identified 2 areas where more work needs to be done. We've always said that to build these projects, Evan, we have to take into account environmental considerations. The court confirmed that in its decision. One thing that's clear to us is going back to the Stephen Harper approach where you can ignore Indigenous consultation and not deal with environmental concerns properly. The court has said that that simply is not the case. We can't go back to that
Mr. LeBlanc,
so we want to go forward in the best way possible.
Yeah, but with all due respect, you can't blame Stephen Harper for this one. Your government pulled the trigger to buy this thing because you thought you had a consultation process that worked. Obviously, the court said you didn't. You thought you had a marine plan that would work. Obviously, that didn't work either. You thought you had support of provinces. Now, Alberta, Rachel Notley saying this has been so screwed up that she's going to pull out her support for the national price on carbon and the climate plan. I mean, this is becoming a very precarious situation.
Alberta has been, with respect to climate change, Evan, a national leader. So we're continuing the conversation with Alberta around a plan to deal with the real effects of climate change. I'm not pessimistic about that conversation. But we're also, as a government, very focused on finding the best way forward to get this pipeline built and to get those resources to markets other than the United States.
Oh, I understand that you may not be pessimistic, but let's be realistic. She's being realistic. She's got an election coming up. She's realistic that if you don't, that pipeline has no progress on, she's politically dead in the water. She knows it, and she's playing tough with you guys. Let me just ask you one final question on this. If the pipeline process, whatever it ends up being, an appeal, more consultation, I don't know, whatever you guys finally decide to do, if it takes longer, will your government stick to your plan to force a price on carbon on all provinces? Ontario, who don't want it, Saskatchewan, who doesn't want it, and now Alberta, who doesn't want it. Will you continue to do that even without getting this pipeline expanded?
As I said at the beginning, Evan, we've never thought that having a robust plan to deal with the real effects of climate change, to put a price on pollution, was dependent on a pipeline. So we're working with all of the provinces and territories right now on the best way to put a price on pollution. And we've said that for jurisdictions that aren't able to meet the shared, agreed upon national framework, then the federal plan will kick in on January 1st. That has not changed.
I appreciate your optimism, Dominic LeBlanc. You're known for your optimism, but it's hard to be optimistic about a pipeline that's had a major setback and there's no idea where the future goes on that. You're now optimistic about a carbon price where Ontario doesn't want one, Saskatchewan doesn't want one, Alberta now may not want one, province after province are turning on you. I'm trying to figure out if your optimism is now naivety on something that is actually falling apart before your eyes.
Well, I don't share your pessimism, Evan. I've had conversations with premiers from the provinces. Well, I've had conversations that lead me to be very encouraged by the desire of provincial governments to put a price on pollution, to recognize that large emitters need to pay a price, and that Canada needs to meet its international obligations with respect to dealing with the real effects of climate change. So we'll continue that conversation with provinces. They're submitting plans and we're reviewing them literally this week, next week, in the coming days. So that conversation doesn't lead me to be pessimistic.
All right, I got to leave it there. This is going to be an issue that, of course, we'll talk lots more about. I really appreciate you joining us today. Minister LeBlanc, great to have you on the program.
Well, thanks again for inviting me, Evan. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
All right, yes, they will be back in 8 days.